The worst betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from the people who once promised to love you forever. Ethan Hayes had spent 3 weeks planning the perfect proposal, and now he stood in the center of the Grand Crescent Hotel ballroom feeling like the entire world was laughing at him. The crystal chandeliers above his head glittered like cruel stars, casting pale gold light across rows of white roses he had arranged himself that morning. Every bouquet in the room carried his touch. Every candle had been chosen by him. Every elegant centerpiece had once felt like proof of how deeply he loved Ryan Cole. But now all Ethan could hear was the sharp sound of laughter behind the half-open suite door at the end of the hallway. His hands trembled around the small velvet ring box hidden in his coat pocket as he stood frozen outside room 1812. He hadn't meant to come upstairs. Ryan had texted him 10 minutes earlier asking him to bring the champagne personally because the staff had apparently forgotten. Ethan should have known something was wrong the second Ryan stopped answering his calls afterward. Still, nothing could have prepared him for what he saw when he pushed the door open. Lucas Reed was sitting on the edge of the suite couch wearing Ryan's dress shirt, his cheeks flushed from laughter while Ryan stood beside him with one arm wrapped casually around his waist. The sight hit Ethan like freezing water poured directly into his lungs. For one horrible second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Lucas looked up first, and the guilt on his face lasted less than a heartbeat before it disappeared completely. "Ethan," Lucas said softly, almost like he was annoyed to be interrupted. Ryan sighed like this was an inconvenience instead of a disaster. "You weren't supposed to see this yet." "Yet." The word shattered something inside Ethan's chest. His fingers tightened around the doorframe as he stared at the two people he trusted most in the world. Lucas had been his best friend since community college. Ryan had been his boyfriend for 4 years. 4 years of late-night takeout dinners, tiny apartment dreams, whispered promises about forever, and quiet mornings. Tangled together under cheap blankets while Ryan told him he was the only person he'd ever truly loved. Ethan suddenly felt stupid for believing any of it. "How long?" Ethan asked quietly. His voice barely sounded human anymore. Ryan exchanged a glance with Lucas before answering. "A few months." "A few months." Ethan almost laughed because earlier that evening Ryan had kissed his forehead in front of 200 guests, and told him he looked beautiful. Ethan had spent 6 hours arranging flowers while Ryan was secretly sleeping with the one person Ethan trusted enough to call family. "You could have told me," Ethan whispered. Ryan finally stepped away from Lucas, straightening his expensive black suit with a look of irritation creeping across his face. "Look, Ethan, I didn't want to embarrass you publicly." Ethan stared at him in disbelief. Embarrass him publicly. As if that wasn't exactly what was happening. As if his entire life wasn't collapsing right there between the polished marble walls of a luxury hotel suite. Lucas crossed his arms nervously. "We didn't mean for it to happen." Ethan looked at him then, really looked at him, and suddenly every small moment over the last year replayed in brutal clarity. The secret texting. The cancelled plans. The strange tension whenever all three of them were together. Lucas avoiding eye contact lately. Ryan working late. God. Everyone probably knew except him. Ethan felt heat rush behind his eyes, but he refused to cry in front of them. Ryan noticed the ring box slipping slightly from Ethan's coat pocket, and his expression darkened immediately. "Wait," Ryan said slowly. "Were you actually going to propose tonight?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. Ryan rubbed a hand down his face before laughing softly under his breath. Not nervous laughter. Not shocked laughter. Cruel laughter. Jesus, Ethan. That hurt more than the cheating. Somehow, that hurt more than anything. Lucas looked uncomfortable now, but Ryan only shook his head like Ethan was exhausting him. "You're sweet, okay? You are. But you don't understand how the world works." Ethan felt his stomach twist violently. Ryan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're too emotional. Too soft. I need someone who pushes me forward, not someone who spends all day arranging flowers and dreaming about fairy tales." Ethan's throat tightened painfully. 4 years. Reduced to that in less than 30 seconds. Ryan exhaled sharply and delivered the final blow with terrifying ease. You were never enough for me, Ethan. Silence swallowed the room whole. Ethan could hear music drifting faintly from the ballroom downstairs where guests were still waiting for the engagement announcement Ryan had promised them. The engagement Ethan had believed was meant for him. His vision blurred. He turned before either of them could see the tears finally gathering in his eyes and walked straight out of the suite. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he couldn't breathe in there anymore. The hallway lights smeared into pale streaks as he stumbled toward the elevator, one hand covering his mouth to stop the shaking. The velvet ring box still sat trapped in his fist hard enough to leave marks against his skin. Behind him, the suite door suddenly opened again. Ethan, wait! Ryan called out impatiently. Ethan stopped walking but didn't turn around. Ryan's footsteps echoed closer across the marble floor. Don't make a scene downstairs, Ryan said coldly. At least try to keep your dignity. Ethan slowly closed his eyes. And that was the exact moment another voice entered the silence. Low. Calm. Dangerous. Interesting thing to say, the stranger drawled smoothly. Coming from the man who cheated on him with his best friend. The hallway fell completely silent after the stranger spoke. Ethan turned slowly, his pulse still shaking violently beneath his skin, and for a moment the entire world seemed to narrow into the man standing several feet away near the elevators. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in an immaculately tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. Dark hair framed a strikingly composed face, sharp enough to look carved from stone beneath the warm hotel lights. But it was his eyes that froze Ethan in place. Cold silver. Calm. Observant. The kind of eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Ryan straightened immediately, irritation flashing across his face. Excuse me? He snapped. The stranger barely looked at him. His attention stayed fixed on Ethan instead, taking in the trembling hands, the pale face, and the obvious heartbreak Ethan was trying desperately to hide. I said, the man replied smoothly, that asking someone to keep their dignity after humiliating them is an interesting choice. Ryan scoffed. This is a private matter. You made it public the second you decided to cheat on him at his own engagement party. Ethan's breath caught softly. The stranger's voice never rose. That somehow made it worse. Ryan opened his mouth again, but the confidence he normally carried was beginning to crack around the edges. Ethan noticed it immediately. Ryan always cared about status. About power. About who was watching. And suddenly Ryan looked very aware of exactly who stood in front of him. Lucas appeared hesitantly in the doorway behind Ryan, his face draining of color the second he recognized the man near the elevators. Oh my God! Lucas whispered under his breath. Ethan frowned slightly. Ryan recovered faster than Lucas did, forcing a stiff smile onto his face. Mr. Cross, he said carefully. I did not realize you were here tonight. Ethan blinked in confusion. Cross. The name hit him half a second later like a lightning strike straight through his chest. Damian Cross. CEO of Cross Holdings. One of the youngest billionaires in Manhattan. The man whose face appeared regularly on magazine covers and business networks with headlines calling him ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. Ethan had seen him once before from a distance at a charity gala while delivering floral arrangements. He remembered women whispering about how terrifying Damian Cross supposedly was. How impossible he was to impress. How he never attended public events unless absolutely necessary. Damian finally shifted his attention toward Ryan, though his expression remained unreadable. Unfortunately for you, Damian said calmly. I was. Ryan visibly swallowed. Ethan could almost feel the power imbalance changing in real time. Ryan worked for a luxury real estate company that desperately wanted investment partnerships with Cross Holdings. Damian Cross was not just wealthy. He controlled careers, futures, entire industries. Ryan forced another laugh that sounded painfully fake. I think there has been a misunderstanding. No, Damien replied. I understood perfectly. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Ethan suddenly became painfully aware that he was still standing there shaking while tears threatened to spill down his face at any second. Humiliation burned through him so fiercely he wanted the marble floor to split open and swallow him whole. He tightened his grip around the ring box hidden inside his coat pocket. Damien noticed the movement instantly. His gaze dropped briefly toward Ethan's clenched hand before returning to his face. Something unreadable flickered behind those silver eyes. Not pity. Somehow that mattered. Ethan could survive anger, judgment, even cruelty. But he could not survive pity tonight. I should go, Ethan whispered hoarsely. He turned toward the elevator again, desperate to escape before his composure shattered completely, but Ryan stepped forward abruptly. Ethan, wait. Ethan froze. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply like he was already exhausted by the entire situation. Do not leave like this, he muttered. People downstairs are waiting. Ethan stared at him in disbelief. Waiting. As though the disaster upstairs was somehow less important than maintaining appearances downstairs. Lucas folded his arms tightly across his chest but avoided looking directly at Ethan now. Guilt lingered across his face, though it was far too late for that to matter anymore. Ryan lowered his voice. We can talk privately tomorrow after everyone leaves. Ethan let out a hollow laugh before he could stop himself. Tomorrow. Ryan wanted to schedule his heartbreak between business meetings like it was some minor inconvenience. Damien's expression darkened almost imperceptibly. You are remarkably arrogant for someone standing in the middle of his own mess, Damien observed coolly. Ryan's jaw tightened. With respect, Mr. Cross, this does not concern you. Damien took one slow step forward. The movement was subtle, controlled, but the pressure in the hallway shifted instantly. Even Ryan noticed it because he instinctively stepped back half an inch without realizing. You are wrong, Damien said quietly. The moment you made him look like collateral damage in front of 200 guests, it became everyone's business. Ethan's chest tightened painfully again. Nobody had defended him tonight. Nobody except this terrifying stranger standing between him and complete humiliation. Damien turned toward Ethan fully now. His voice softened slightly, though it remained calm enough to send chills down Ethan's spine. Did you eat anything tonight? Ethan blinked, completely caught off guard by the question. What? You look like you are about to pass out. Ethan realized suddenly that he had not eaten since breakfast. He had spent the entire day preparing flowers, organizing seating charts, and helping coordinate the event Ryan insisted had to be perfect. His stomach twisted sharply now that the adrenaline was beginning to crash. Damien glanced briefly toward the ballroom downstairs before returning his attention to Ethan again. Come with me, he said simply. Ryan's expression changed instantly. Excuse me? Damien ignored him completely. Ethan stared at the billionaire in confusion. I do not even know you, Ethan admitted softly. Damien held his gaze for several long seconds before answering. No, he said quietly. But I know enough to recognize when someone deserves better than this. Then Damien Cross extended his hand toward him, while the entire hallway fell silent once again. Ethan stared at Damien's outstretched hand like it belonged to another reality entirely. Everything around him still felt unreal, distorted by heartbreak and humiliation and the crushing disbelief that only 20 minutes earlier he had walked into this hotel believing he was about to begin the rest of his life with Ryan. Now Ryan stood a few feet away looking furious while Damien Cross waited with impossible patience, his silver eyes calm and unreadable beneath the warm glow of the hallway lights. Nobody spoke. Ethan became painfully aware of how loud his own heartbeat sounded in the silence. Mr. Cross, Ryan said tightly, forcing politeness through clenched teeth. I think you are overstepping. Damien did not even glance at him this time. And I think you lost the right to have opinions about his well-being the second you betrayed him. Ethan saw Ryan's expression harden instantly. Ryan hated being embarrassed. Hated losing control. But there was nothing he could do here. Damien Cross held too much power in too many rooms. Even now, people were beginning to notice the tension gathering in the hallway. Several hotel guests slowed near the elevators, whispering quietly the moment they recognized Damien. Ethan suddenly wanted to disappear all over again. His chest tightened painfully as he realized this nightmare was no longer private. It was becoming public. Ryan noticed the attention too and immediately lowered his voice. "Ethan," he said sharply, "stop standing there and come inside so we can discuss this like adults." Ethan looked at him slowly. Something inside him felt strangely numb now. Maybe his heart had simply reached its limit. "Discuss what?" Ethan asked quietly. Ryan blinked. Ethan's voice sounded different even to himself. Colder. Tired. "You already made your choice." Lucas flinched visibly at those words. Ryan exhaled hard through his nose. "You are being dramatic." The sentence landed harder than Ethan expected. For years together. For years of loving someone so completely that Ethan had built entire dreams around him. And now Ryan looked at his heartbreak like it was inconvenient background noise. Damien's expression cooled even further. "Interesting," Damien murmured softly. "You destroy someone's trust and then criticize their reaction to it." Ryan's jaw tightened again. "Why are you even involved?" For the first time since entering the hallway, Damien finally looked directly at Ryan with full attention. The temperature in the air seemed to drop instantly. Ethan could suddenly understand why business magazines called Damien Cross intimidating. Damien never raised his voice. He never needed to. "Because," Damien said evenly, "somebody should be." Ryan stared at him in silence. Ethan's throat tightened unexpectedly. Nobody had ever stood up for him like this before. Not without wanting something in return. Damien slowly lowered his hand when Ethan still did not move, but his voice remained steady. "You should leave before this gets uglier," he told Ethan quietly. "The ballroom downstairs is full of people waiting for a celebration that is not happening anymore." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. God. The guests. Friends. Co-workers. Clients. Everyone downstairs probably still believed tonight was an engagement party. He could already imagine the whispers spreading once people realized what happened. Ryan suddenly stepped forward again. "You are not leaving with him." Damien turned slightly. That sounded less like concern and more like possession. "He is my boyfriend." Ethan laughed softly before he could stop himself. The sound cracked painfully in the middle. Ryan looked at him immediately. "Ethan." "No," Ethan whispered. "I do not think I am anymore." The hallway fell silent again. Lucas looked down at the floor. Ryan's face paled slightly, like hearing the truth spoken out loud made the consequences suddenly real. Ethan felt tears threaten again, but he swallowed them down hard. He refused to completely fall apart in front of these people. Damien studied Ethan quietly for several seconds before speaking again. "Do you trust me enough to walk away from this hallway?" Ethan almost said no automatically. Trust was suddenly the most terrifying word in the English language. But then he looked back at Ryan. Ryan, who cheated on him for months. Ryan, who laughed at the proposal ring hidden in Ethan's pocket. Ryan, who called him too soft to deserve love. And beside Ryan stood Lucas, avoiding eye contact because guilt could not undo betrayal. Ethan realized suddenly there was nothing left for him here anymore. Absolutely nothing. So Ethan inhaled shakily and nodded once. Damien's expression did not change, but something subtle softened around his eyes. "Good," he said quietly. Then he reached for Ethan's coat sleeve gently, not possessive, not forceful, simply guiding him toward the elevators. Ryan's voice cut sharply through the hallway behind them. "Ethan, if you walk away now, do not expect me to fix this later." Ethan stopped moving. For one dangerous second, silence swallowed everything again. Damien's hand loosened immediately like he would let Ethan choose freely. Ethan slowly turned around one final time. Ryan stood near the suite doorway with frustration written all over his face while Lucas remained frozen behind him. Neither of them looked sorry enough. Ethan reached into his coat pocket slowly and pulled out the small velvet ring box he had spent 3 weeks hiding from Ryan. The sight of it made Ryan's expression shift instantly. Regret flashed briefly across his face for the first time all night. Ethan stared at the ring box for several long seconds before walking back toward Ryan. Hope flickered visibly in Ryan's eyes. Then Ethan placed the ring box directly into Ryan's hand. "You should give it to someone else," Ethan said softly. Ryan's face went completely blank. Ethan stepped back immediately afterward and turned away before the tears could finally fall. Damien watched him carefully as the elevator doors opened beside them with a quiet chime. Ethan stepped inside first, trembling from head to toe now that adrenaline was beginning to collapse entirely. Damien followed a second later. The doors started sliding shut. And just before they closed completely, Damien looked directly at Ryan and said calmly, "You had someone rare. That is not a mistake you will recover from easily." The elevator descended in complete silence except for the faint hum of machinery and Ethan's uneven breathing. He stood rigid near the mirrored wall with his arms wrapped tightly around himself like he was physically trying to keep from falling apart. The adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation upstairs was finally fading, leaving behind exhaustion so deep it settled into his bones. Across from him, Damien Cross remained impossibly composed. One hand rested casually in his coat pocket while the other loosened the cuff of his sleeve with calm precision, as though emotionally catastrophic evenings were just another item on his schedule. Ethan could still feel the weight of Damien's presence filling the small space between them. Not suffocating. Not aggressive. Just steady. Controlled. Safe in a way Ethan did not fully understand yet. The elevator doors opened into the underground parking level with a soft chime. Damien stepped out first, then paused when Ethan did not immediately follow. "You are thinking too loudly," Damien observed quietly. Ethan blinked in surprise before giving a weak laugh. "Is it that obvious?" "Extremely." Ethan finally stepped out of the elevator. The underground garage was nearly silent except for the distant sound of engines and the occasional echo of footsteps across polished concrete floors. Luxury cars lined the private section near the elevators, sleek and dark beneath rows of cold white lights. Ethan suddenly became very aware that his entire life existed in a completely different universe from Damien's. He still lived in a 700-square-foot apartment above a bakery in Brooklyn with uneven heating and a bathroom door that never shut properly. Meanwhile, Damien Cross probably owned buildings larger than Ethan's entire neighborhood. "You do not have to stay with me," Ethan said quietly after several moments. Damien stopped beside a black town car waiting near the private entrance. "I know." Ethan hesitated. "Then why are you helping me?" Damien looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because you looked at that hallway like you had nowhere left to go." The honesty of the answer caught Ethan off guard. There was no manipulation in Damien's voice. No expectation. Just observation. Damien opened the back passenger door for him calmly. "Get in before the gossip blogs notice you leaving the hotel looking devastated beside me." Ethan stared at him in alarm. "The blogs? You underestimated how recognizable I am." Ethan suddenly looked around nervously, panic flickering across his face again. Damien noticed immediately. "Relax," he said smoothly. "Nobody has photos yet." Yet. Ethan climbed into the car anyway because the idea of standing in public right now felt unbearable. The interior smelled faintly of cedarwood and expensive leather. Warm lighting glowed softly above the seats while the city lights blurred beyond tinted windows. Damien entered beside him moments later and gave the driver a brief instruction Ethan did not catch before the car pulled away from the hotel entrance. Manhattan drifted past outside in streaks of gold and silver. Ethan watched the city silently while trying very hard not to cry again. He failed about 4 minutes later. The tears came quietly at first, slipping down his face before he even realized they had started. Ethan turned his head sharply toward the window in embarrassment, but Damien noticed anyway. Of course he did. Damien noticed everything. He reached into the compartment beside him and removed a folded handkerchief before holding it out wordlessly. Ethan stared at it. You carry handkerchiefs? Damien's mouth twitched slightly for the first time all evening. Apparently. Ethan took it carefully. The fabric was soft and smelled faintly like cedarwood. Thank you, he whispered. Silence settled between them again, though this one felt less painful somehow. Ethan wiped his eyes quickly before speaking again. I feel stupid. Damien glanced toward him. For trusting someone you loved? Ethan swallowed hard and nodded once. Damien looked back toward the passing city lights outside. That says more about him than it does about you. Ethan pressed the handkerchief tighter in his hands. Nobody had spoken to him gently all night except this man beside him, and somehow that almost made the heartbreak worse because Ethan had forgotten what kindness sounded like. After several quiet minutes, Damien finally spoke again. Did you really plan to propose tonight? Ethan laughed weakly through the remains of his tears. Was it that obvious? The ring box was difficult to miss. Ethan stared down at his hands. I spent 3 months saving for it. Damien's expression changed almost imperceptibly. 3 months. Ethan nodded slowly. Ryan liked expensive things. The moment the words left his mouth, Ethan suddenly realized how sad they sounded. Damien seemed to realize it too because something colder settled behind his silver eyes again. And what did you like? Ethan blinked in confusion. What? You spent months thinking about what he wanted, Damien said quietly. What about you? Ethan opened his mouth before realizing he genuinely did not know how to answer. The silence stretched too long. Damien watched him carefully, and for the first time all night Ethan felt something dangerous shift beneath the calm surface of the billionaire sitting beside him. Not anger exactly. Something quieter. Something far more personal. The car slowed smoothly before pulling beneath the glowing entrance of a towering glass skyscraper overlooking the river. Ethan tilted his head back slightly, staring up at the building disappearing into the Manhattan skyline. You live here? Ethan asked softly. Damien glanced toward the tower without interest. Unfortunately. Ethan almost smiled despite himself. A uniformed concierge opened the car door immediately as they arrived. Damien stepped out first before turning back toward Ethan. Come upstairs, he said calmly. Ethan hesitated again. His entire life had become unrecognizable in less than an hour. He had lost the man he thought he would marry, discovered his best friend's betrayal, and now stood outside one of the most exclusive buildings in New York beside a billionaire whose face belonged on magazine covers. Nothing about tonight made sense anymore. Damien seemed to notice the uncertainty in his expression because his voice softened slightly when he spoke again. You do not have to trust me yet, Damien said quietly. Just trust that I am not going to hurt you. And somehow, standing beneath the cold Manhattan lights with his entire world still collapsing around him, Ethan believed him. Ethan followed Damien through the towering marble lobby in a daze, barely noticing the concierge greeting Damien by name or the way several employees immediately straightened the second the billionaire entered the building. The entire space felt impossibly elegant, all polished stone and warm golden light reflecting across floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the river. Ethan suddenly became painfully aware of his wrinkled suit, his red eyes, and the fact that he still smelled faintly like the hotel ballroom where his entire life had fallen apart less than 2 hours earlier. Damien, meanwhile, moved through the lobby. With effortless control, calm and unreadable beneath the attention surrounding him. Nobody questioned why he had brought a devastated stranger home in the middle of the night. Nobody dared to. The private elevator opened with a soft chime, and Damien stepped inside first before pressing the top floor button. Ethan hesitated before entering after him. I still feel like this is a hallucination, Ethan admitted quietly once the elevator doors closed. Damien glanced toward him. The betrayal or the penthouse? Ethan let out a surprised laugh despite himself. Honestly? Both. The corner of Damien's mouth lifted slightly again before the expression disappeared almost instantly. Ethan was beginning to realize those tiny moments of warmth felt strangely important because Damien otherwise seemed carved entirely from restraint. The elevator rose in smooth silence until the doors finally opened directly into the penthouse itself. Ethan stopped walking immediately. The space was breathtaking. Massive windows wrapped around the entire living area, revealing the glittering Manhattan skyline stretching endlessly beneath the midnight sky. Soft amber lighting glowed against dark wood floors and modern furniture arranged with impossible precision. The penthouse looked less like a home and more like something from an architectural magazine. Beautiful. Expensive. Untouchable. Yet despite the scale of it all, the space felt strangely quiet. Empty in a way Ethan could not explain. Damien loosened his tie as he crossed the living room. "You can stop looking terrified," he said casually. "I am not going to lock you in here." Ethan flushed slightly. "Sorry." Damien shrugged once. "You had a difficult evening." He disappeared briefly down a hallway before returning a moment later holding a folded gray sweatshirt and matching sweatpants. Ethan blinked in surprise. "What is this?" "Clean clothes." Ethan stared at the oversized sweatshirt in confusion. "You just casually keep spare clothes for emotional emergencies?" Damien looked completely serious as he answered. "Apparently." Ethan laughed again before he could stop himself. The sound startled both of them slightly. It was the first genuine laugh Ethan had managed all night. Damien noticed too because something subtle shifted in his expression again, something quieter than satisfaction, but dangerously close to relief. "The guest room is down the hall on the left," Damien said. "Bathroom is attached. There are unopened toiletries beneath the sink." Ethan accepted the clothes carefully. "Thank you." Damien gave a short nod before walking toward the kitchen area. "You are still running on caffeine and heartbreak," he observed. "Sit down before you collapse." Ethan obeyed almost automatically because exhaustion was finally crushing him completely. He sat carefully at the massive kitchen island while Damien moved around the sleek marble counters with surprising familiarity. Ethan watched him silently for a moment. "You cook?" Ethan asked weakly. "Rarely." "Then what are you doing?" "Making tea before you pass out from stress." Ethan stared at him in confusion. "How do you know tea helps?" Damien opened one of the cabinets without looking. "Chamomile lowers anxiety." Ethan blinked slowly. "You know that specifically?" "I know many things specifically." The answer should not have sounded mysterious, but somehow it did. Ethan sat quietly while Damien prepared the tea with calm efficiency. There was something strangely mesmerizing about watching a man worth billions standing barefoot in a penthouse kitchen at 1:30 in the morning making chamomile tea for someone he barely knew. Nothing about tonight followed normal logic anymore. Damien placed the steaming mug in front of Ethan a few minutes later. "Careful," he said softly. "It is hot." Ethan wrapped both hands around the warm ceramic immediately, suddenly realizing how cold he had been all evening. The heat seeped slowly back into his fingers. Silence settled between them again, though it no longer felt uncomfortable. Outside the windows, Manhattan shimmered beneath the dark sky while traffic lights drifted like rivers of gold far below. Ethan stared down into his tea for several long moments before speaking quietly. "Why were you really at the hotel tonight?" Damien leaned lightly against the opposite counter. "Business fundraiser." Ethan nodded slowly. "Do you usually rescue strangers after fundraisers?" Damien's silver eyes held his for a second too long. "No." The honesty in that single word sent something strange through Ethan's chest. Ethan looked down quickly again. "You still barely know me." Damien was quiet for a moment before answering. "I know enough." Ethan frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Damien reached for the glass of water beside him but did not drink it immediately. "It means," he said carefully, "that I have seen the way you look at people when you think they are not paying attention." Ethan froze completely. Slowly, he looked back up. Damien's expression remained calm, but his gaze never wavered. "You have seen me before?" Damien took a slow sip of water before answering. "Many times." Ethan's heartbeat stumbled hard against his ribs. What? Damien set the glass down quietly. There's a small flower shop on Lexington Avenue, he said. You rearrange the window displays yourself every Tuesday night because you do not trust the employees to balance the colors correctly. Ethan stared at him in complete shock. How do you know that? Damien's voice stayed perfectly even. Because I walk past that shop 3 nights a week after work. The room suddenly felt very still. Ethan's pulse quickened for an entirely different reason now. Damien continued watching him carefully, calm as ever, while Ethan slowly realized something impossible. Tonight had not been the first time Damien Cross noticed him. Not even close. Ethan stared at Damien across the kitchen island while his exhausted brain struggled to process the revelation. The billionaire stood perfectly calm beneath the warm penthouse lights, one hand resting lightly against the marble counter, as though admitting he had quietly watched Ethan for months was completely normal behavior. Meanwhile, Ethan's heartbeat had become dangerously unsteady all over again. You know my schedule? Ethan asked carefully. Damien tilted his head slightly. Not intentionally. That does not sound reassuring. Something faintly amused flickered through Damien's silver eyes. You close the flower shop every Tuesday at 9:30. You reorganize the roses first because you hate when the colors clash near the front window. Then you spend 20 minutes fixing arrangements nobody except you notices. Ethan could only stare at him. Every detail was correct. That is incredibly specific, Ethan whispered. Damien looked entirely unbothered by the accusation hidden in Ethan's tone. You are observant when it comes to flowers, Damien replied smoothly. I am observant when it comes to people. Ethan looked down at the tea in his hands because suddenly holding eye contact felt far too intense. Outside the massive windows, Manhattan glowed beneath the dark sky like another universe entirely, but the penthouse itself had become strangely quiet. Intimate in a way Ethan did not know how to handle. Why me? Ethan asked softly before he could stop himself. Damien did not answer immediately. Ethan glanced back up and found Damien watching him with that same unnervingly calm expression. You looked lonely, Damien said finally. Ethan's chest tightened painfully. That is your reason? Part of it. Ethan let out a slow breath. Most people do not notice lonely florists arranging roses in shop windows. Damien's gaze lowered briefly toward Ethan's hands still wrapped around the mug. Most people are distracted by louder things. Silence settled again. Ethan suddenly remembered all the nights he had worked late arranging displays while wondering whether Ryan still loved him the way he used to. All those evenings spent trying harder. Smiling harder. Becoming softer and smaller and easier to keep around. And somehow, during all that time, Damien Cross had apparently been quietly watching from the sidewalk outside. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it made his chest ache in a completely different way. Ethan looked away first. This is insane. Probably. You are talking about me like I am some mystery documentary you accidentally became emotionally invested in. Damien's mouth twitched slightly again. That is not inaccurate. Ethan laughed despite himself, then immediately covered his face with one hand in embarrassment. I cannot believe this is my life right now. Damien studied him quietly for another moment before speaking again. You laugh more than you realize. Ethan lowered his hand slowly. What? Usually right before you say something self-deprecating. Ethan blinked in surprise. Damien continued calmly. You also apologize constantly even when nothing is your fault. Ethan stared at him. You analyze people for fun? No, Damien said softly. Only the ones I care about. The room went completely still. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs slowly. Damien seemed to realize the weight of what he had just said because his expression shifted almost imperceptibly afterward, though he did not take the words back. Ethan's pulse became painfully aware of itself again. You barely know me, Ethan whispered. Damien held his gaze steadily. I know you stayed late at the flower shop during snowstorms because your elderly customers still needed deliveries. I know you gave free bouquets to the bakery owner next door after her husband died because she could not afford funeral flowers. Ethan's eyes widened slowly. How do you know that? I was there. Ethan's throat tightened unexpectedly. Damien looked down briefly before continuing in that same maddeningly calm voice. I know you always put the damaged flowers aside instead of throwing them away because you think they still deserve to be appreciated. Ethan could not speak anymore. Nobody had ever paid attention to him like this before. Not Ryan. Not Lucas. Nobody. Ethan had spent most of his life feeling invisible unless someone needed something from him. Yet somehow this terrifyingly powerful man sitting across from him had noticed tiny details Ethan himself barely remembered. Damien leaned back slightly against the counter. You were easy to notice, he admitted quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. You make that sound dangerous. Damien's expression darkened with something unreadable. It probably is. The honesty in his voice sent warmth racing unexpectedly through Ethan's chest. Dangerous. That was exactly what this felt like. Not because Damien frightened him, but because Ethan could already feel himself becoming emotionally unsteady around someone who looked at him too carefully. Someone who noticed too much. Ethan stared down at the tea again, trying desperately to steady his thoughts. Ryan used to say I was too emotional, Ethan admitted quietly. Damien's face cooled instantly at the mention of Ryan's name. Ryan sounds deeply unintelligent. Ethan startled into another laugh. Damien looked almost offended by the memory itself now. Being emotionally aware is not weakness, Damien said evenly. Most people spend their entire lives incapable of genuine softness. Ethan looked at him carefully then. And what about you? Damien went quiet. The silence stretched long enough that Ethan thought he might not answer at all. Then Damien finally spoke in a lower voice than before. I learned a long time ago that softness is expensive. Ethan's chest tightened again, though for an entirely different reason now. For the first time all night, Damien looked tired. Not physically. Something deeper than that. Ethan suddenly realized how lonely this enormous penthouse probably felt with only one person living inside it. Beautiful spaces could still feel empty. Maybe Damien understood loneliness better than he let people see. Before Ethan could respond, a soft vibration interrupted the silence. Damien glanced toward the phone resting near the counter. The moment he saw the screen, his expression sharpened instantly back into that cold composure Ethan first noticed at the hotel. Damien answered calmly. What happened? Ethan watched the billionaire listen silently for several seconds before Damien's silver eyes shifted slowly toward him. Interesting. Damien murmured into the phone. Send it to me immediately. He ended the call without another word. Ethan frowned slightly. What is wrong? Damien picked up the phone again, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly as he looked at the screen. Then he turned it toward Ethan. Ethan's stomach dropped instantly. A gossip article had already gone live online. The headline stretched across the screen in brutal letters. Billionaire CEO Damien Cross leaves charity gala with crying mystery Omega after public relationships scandal. Ethan stared at the glowing phone screen while cold dread slowly spread through his chest. The article had already gathered thousands of views in less than 20 minutes. A blurry photo taken outside the hotel showed Damien helping Ethan into the town car while Ethan's face remained visibly tear-streaked beneath the city lights. The comments underneath were even worse. Speculation. Rumors. People trying to identify him. Some blamed Damien. Some mocked Ethan for crying in public. Others were already discussing Ryan's name because guests from the gala had started leaking details online. Ethan felt sick. This cannot be real, Ethan whispered. Damien remained unnervingly calm beside him. Unfortunately, it is. Ethan looked down at the screen again. Billionaire CEO Damien Cross leaves charity gala with crying mystery Omega after public relationships scandal. Even the headline sounded humiliating. Ethan rubbed a shaky hand over his face. I am going to lose my job. Damien's eyes lifted immediately. Why? Ethan laughed bitterly. Because internet scandals are not exactly good for small businesses. Damien looked entirely unconvinced. Your employer would fire you because someone betrayed you publicly? Ethan looked away toward the city skyline again. You do not understand how normal people live. Silence settled briefly. Damien studied him for several seconds before speaking carefully. You keep talking like your life matters less because you are not wealthy. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again because he did not know how to explain the exhaustion of constantly being disposable. Damien sighed quietly and set the phone face down against the marble counter. Nobody is firing you tomorrow. You cannot know that. I can. Ethan frowned slightly. Damien's expression remained cool and composed again, but there was steel beneath his voice now. Nobody connected to me is going to become collateral damage because gossip websites need entertainment. Ethan blinked. Connected to me. The phrase settled strangely in his chest. Damien crossed the kitchen slowly before stopping beside the massive windows overlooking Manhattan. His reflection shimmered faintly against the glass beneath the city lights. The article will get worse by morning, Damien admitted calmly. Ethan's stomach dropped. Worse? People are already investigating who you are. Ethan suddenly felt panic clawing at his ribs again. I do not want strangers digging through my life. Damien turned toward him immediately, noticing the fear before Ethan even fully processed it himself. Look at me. Ethan obeyed automatically. Damien's silver eyes held his steadily. Nobody is going to touch your apartment, your work, or your personal information. How can you promise that? Damien's expression darkened slightly. Because I already instructed my legal team to shut down anything invasive. Ethan stared at him in disbelief. You have a legal team handling this right now? I have several. Ethan laughed weakly from pure exhaustion. Of course you do. Damien watched him carefully for another moment before his voice softened slightly again. You are safe here tonight. The simple certainty in those words nearly broke something inside Ethan all over again. Safe. He could not remember the last time someone made safety sound so absolute. Ethan lowered himself slowly onto one of the stools beside the kitchen island again because suddenly standing felt exhausting. His thoughts kept spiraling uncontrollably between heartbreak, humiliation, and the terrifying realization that his private life was becoming public entertainment overnight. Damien crossed back toward the counter and picked up the phone again. His jaw tightened faintly as he scrolled. Ethan noticed immediately. What now? Damien hesitated briefly before answering. Ryan spoke to reporters outside the hotel. Ethan felt his entire body go still. What did he say? Damien's expression cooled further. That you became emotional after the relationship ended unexpectedly. Ethan laughed once in complete disbelief. Emotional. Like 4 years together was some minor misunderstanding. Damien continued scrolling silently. The atmosphere around him sharpened dangerously with every passing second. Ethan suddenly realized Damien was angry. Not loud anger. Something colder. More controlled. Somehow that felt far more intimidating. There is more, Damien said quietly. Ethan's stomach twisted. Just tell me. Damien looked directly at him. Ryan implied you misunderstood the seriousness of your relationship. Ethan stared at him blankly for several seconds before the meaning finally landed. Ryan was trying to make Ethan look delusional. Like the proposal plans. The future. The relationship itself had only mattered to Ethan. Humiliation flooded him so hard it physically hurt. I hate him, Ethan whispered, tears burning suddenly behind his eyes again. Damien set the phone down carefully before stepping closer. No, he corrected softly. You hate the version of him you discovered tonight. Ethan looked up slowly. Damien's expression had softened again in a way that felt almost dangerous now because Ethan was becoming far too aware of how closely Damien watched him. There is a difference, Damien continued quietly. The person you loved probably never truly existed. Ethan swallowed hard. The truth of that hurt more than anything else. Damien noticed the tears gathering again immediately. Without hesitation, he reached into his suit jacket and removed another folded handkerchief before placing it gently in front of Ethan. Ethan stared at it helplessly. Do billionaires carry endless emotional support handkerchiefs? Damien's mouth twitched faintly. Only during unusually catastrophic evenings. Ethan laughed through the tears despite himself. Damien watched him with something strangely gentle hidden beneath his composure. That is the third time I have made you laugh tonight, Damien observed quietly. Ethan blinked at him. Are you counting? Yes. The honesty startled Ethan again. Everything about Damien felt precise. Intentional. Like he paid attention to moments most people ignored completely. Ethan looked down at the handkerchief again before speaking softly. Why do you care this much? The question lingered heavily between them. Damien went quiet for several seconds. Then he reached for the phone once more and turned the screen toward Ethan again. Ethan frowned in confusion until he noticed the newest article update flashing across the screen beneath the original headline. Anonymous sources now claim Damien Cross has privately admired the mystery Omega for months. Ethan's breath caught instantly. Slowly, he looked back up at Damien. Damien met his gaze without looking away once. Because, Damien said quietly, that part is true. Ethan forgot how to breathe for several seconds. The city lights outside the penthouse windows blurred faintly behind Damien's silhouette, while the words settled heavily between them. Because that part is true. Damien stood perfectly still after saying it, calm as ever, yet something deeper lingered beneath the composure now. Not embarrassment. Not hesitation. Just honesty delivered with terrifying directness. Ethan stared at him in complete disbelief. You admired me? Ethan repeated softly, like the sentence itself made no logical sense. Damien's silver eyes held his steadily. Yes. Ethan let out a weak laugh from pure shock. You are a billionaire. Damien looked unimpressed by the statement. That is not a personality trait. Ethan blinked at him. Somehow even now Damien still managed to sound dryly amused while completely destabilizing Ethan's entire understanding of reality. Ethan looked back down at the article on the phone screen again. Anonymous sources now claim Damien Cross has privately admired the mystery Omega for months. Who leaked this? Ethan asked quietly. Damien reached for the phone and locked the screen with one smooth motion. Nobody close to me. Ethan frowned. Then how would anyone know? Damien was silent for half a second too long. Ethan narrowed his eyes slowly. Damien. The billionaire sighed quietly. My head of security noticed I kept altering my evening route. Ethan stared at him. For the flower shop? Yes. You rerouted your schedule around a flower shop? Damien folded his arms loosely across his chest, looking entirely unashamed. I dislike traffic on Madison Avenue. Ethan let out another startled laugh. That is absolutely not the reason. Damien's mouth twitched slightly again. No. It is not. The honesty of it made warmth rush unexpectedly through Ethan's chest despite the emotional disaster of the evening. Ethan looked away quickly before Damien could notice. Unfortunately, Damien noticed everything. You are blushing, Damien observed calmly. Ethan nearly choked on his own breathing. I am emotionally exhausted. And blushing. Ethan covered his face briefly with one hand. Please stop being observant for 5 minutes. Damien looked genuinely thoughtful. I do not think I know how. Ethan laughed again despite himself, then immediately felt guilty for laughing at all while his entire relationship still lay in ruins. The emotional whiplash of tonight was becoming impossible to process. Damien noticed the shift instantly. You are thinking about him again. Ethan lowered his hand slowly. I was with Ryan for 4 years. Damien's expression cooled slightly at the name, but remained patient. I know. Ethan swallowed hard. I do not understand how somebody can say they love you for years and still do something like that. Silence stretched quietly through the penthouse. Damien finally moved closer before resting one hand lightly against the marble counter beside Ethan, close enough for warmth to exist between them but not touching. Some people love convenience more than they love people, Damien said quietly. Ethan looked up slowly. Damien's gaze remained fixed on him with impossible steadiness. That is not your fault. Ethan stared at him for several long seconds before asking the question that had been haunting him since the hotel hallway. Why did you step in tonight? Damien went quiet again. The city lights reflected softly across the sharp lines of his face while he considered the answer carefully. Because watching you stand there while they treated your heartbreak like an inconvenience made me angry, Damien admitted. Ethan's chest tightened unexpectedly. Damien's voice lowered slightly. And because I knew if I let you walk away alone tonight, you would spend the next month convincing yourself you deserved what happened. Ethan felt his eyes sting again immediately. God. That was exactly what he would have done. Damien studied him carefully. You apologize for existing too often, Ethan. The softness in Damien's voice nearly undid him completely. Ethan looked down at his hands again because suddenly eye contact felt dangerous. Nobody has ever defended me like this before, Ethan admitted. Quietly. Damien's expression shifted almost imperceptibly at those words. Something colder flashed briefly beneath the calm surface again, like the idea genuinely upset him. Then the people around you failed you, Damien said evenly. Ethan's pulse stumbled hard. The penthouse suddenly felt very small despite its enormous size. Ethan became painfully aware of the quiet intimacy surrounding them. The warm lights. The midnight skyline. Damien standing close enough that Ethan could faintly smell cedarwood and clean winter air beneath the remains of the expensive cologne from the gala. Nothing about tonight felt real anymore. Damien glanced toward the digital clock near the kitchen. It is almost 2 a.m. Ethan blinked in surprise. Seriously? You have been emotionally unraveling in my kitchen for nearly 3 hours. Ethan groaned softly, and covered his face again. That is humiliating. Not particularly. Easy for you to say. You still look like you walked out of a magazine cover. Damien looked genuinely confused. Is that supposed to be comforting? Ethan laughed helplessly. No. Honestly, it makes things worse. For the first time all night, Damien laughed too. Quiet. Low. Brief enough that Ethan almost wondered if he imagined it. But the sound transformed Damien's entire face for half a second, softening the cold edges into something unexpectedly warm. Ethan stared before he could stop himself. Damien noticed immediately. Of course he did. What? Damien asked quietly. Ethan looked away too late. Nothing. Damien remained suspiciously calm. That was not nothing. Ethan rubbed his forehead tiredly. You are different when you laugh. Silence followed the confession instantly. Ethan realized what he said and wanted to disappear directly into the marble floor. Damien, meanwhile, went very still. Different how? Ethan swallowed hard. Less terrifying. Damien looked almost offended. I was not aware I was terrifying. Ethan stared at him flatly. You are Damien Cross. That explains nothing. There are entire articles online describing you as emotionally unavailable and frightening. Damien considered that calmly. Interesting. Ethan narrowed his eyes. You sound proud of it. No, Damien said softly. Just surprised that you read articles about me. Ethan froze completely. Damien's silver eyes sharpened immediately with quiet satisfaction. You did, Damien observed. Ethan opened his mouth uselessly while Damien stepped just slightly closer. How long? Damien asked quietly. Ethan's heartbeat became dangerously loud. That is not fair. Damien's gaze never left his face. How long, Ethan? Ethan looked away first, cheeks burning now for an entirely different reason. Long enough to know you donated $30 million to pediatric hospitals without announcing it publicly. Silence crashed heavily between them. When Ethan finally risked looking back up, Damien was staring at him with an expression Ethan could not decipher at all. Ethan's face burned instantly beneath Damien's steady gaze. The penthouse had become unbearably quiet again, the city lights outside reflecting across the windows in soft silver and gold while the tension between them tightened into something Ethan no longer knew how to name. Damien still stood close enough that Ethan could feel the warmth radiating from him, calm and composed even after learning Ethan had quietly followed articles about him for years. Somehow that felt more exposing than everything else that had happened tonight. Ethan looked down quickly, gripping the edge of the marble counter like it might stabilize his pulse. "That sounds creepier out loud," Ethan muttered weakly. Damien's expression softened with unmistakable amusement. "Not particularly." Ethan let out a helpless breath. "Easy for you to say. You are not the florist secretly reading business interviews at 2 in the morning." Damien leaned slightly against the counter beside him. "What did you read them for?" Ethan hesitated. The honest answer felt embarrassing now. "You always sounded different from everyone else." Damien studied him carefully. "Different how?" Ethan glanced up briefly before looking away again. "You never talked about money first." Damien went very still at that answer. Ethan continued quietly before he could lose courage. "Every interview always asked about your company or your investments or how much you were worth, but you kept redirecting the conversation toward employees or charities or housing programs." Ethan shrugged one shoulder awkwardly. "I guess I noticed." Damien watched him in complete silence for several long seconds. Something unreadable shifted behind his silver eyes again, softer than before but somehow far more intense. Ethan suddenly became aware that neither of them had moved away from each other in several minutes. "You paid attention too," Damien said quietly. Ethan laughed nervously. "Apparently we both sound insane." "Possibly." Ethan finally looked back at him fully then, and the moment stretched dangerously long. Damien looked tired now in a way Ethan had not noticed earlier. Not physically exhausted. Emotionally restrained for too long. Ethan suddenly realized that beneath the terrifying billionaire reputation and impossible composure, Damien seemed almost startled by being understood at all. The thought made Ethan's chest ache unexpectedly. Before either of them could speak again, Ethan's phone buzzed violently against the counter. Both of them looked down immediately. Ethan's stomach dropped the second he saw Ryan's name lighting up the screen. 9 missed calls. 12 unread messages. Damien's expression cooled instantly. Ethan swallowed hard before unlocking the phone with trembling fingers. The newest message sat at the top of the screen. "Ryan, you embarrassed me tonight." Ethan stared at the words in complete disbelief. Beneath that message sat another one sent only a minute later. "Ryan, call me before this gets worse." Ethan let out a hollow laugh that sounded dangerously close to heartbreak again. Damien quietly held out his hand. "May I?" Ethan hesitated before passing him the phone. Damien read the messages silently, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly with every line. More messages appeared beneath the first ones. "Ryan, reporters are outside my apartment now." "Ryan, Lucas is freaking out." "Ryan, we need to fix this together." Damien slowly looked up from the phone. "Interesting." Ethan rubbed his forehead tiredly. "I cannot believe he still thinks this is my responsibility." Damien handed the phone back carefully. People like Ryan rarely see other people clearly. They only see consequences. Ethan stared at the glowing messages for another moment before locking the screen entirely. Suddenly he felt exhausted down to the bone. "I wasted 4 years," Ethan whispered quietly. Damien's gaze softened again immediately. "No," he corrected. "You loved sincerely for 4 years. That is not waste." Ethan looked up slowly. Damien continued in that same calm voice. "The wrong person receiving your love does not make your love worthless." The words hit Ethan so hard his vision blurred instantly again. He looked away before Damien could fully see the tears gathering in his eyes, but it was pointless. Damien noticed everything. A long silence settled between them while the city shimmered outside. Then, quietly, Ethan admitted the thought that had haunted him since the hotel hallway. "I think part of me knew something was wrong long before tonight." Damien remained still beside him. Ethan stared down at his hands. "Ryan stopped looking at me months ago." His voice cracked softly. I kept trying harder anyway. Damien's expression darkened with something painfully close to anger. That was not your job, he said evenly. Ethan laughed weakly through the tears. I know that now. Damien reached toward him slowly then, giving Ethan enough time to pull away if he wanted. When Ethan did not move, Damien gently brushed one thumb beneath Ethan's eye, catching a tear before it could fall completely. The touch was so careful it almost hurt. Ethan froze. The entire world seemed to go silent around them. Damien's hand lingered for only half a second before he stepped back again immediately, restraint snapping back into place across his expression. But the damage was already done. Ethan's heartbeat had become completely unmanageable. Damien looked away first this time, exhaling quietly. You should sleep, he said softly. Ethan swallowed hard. Probably. Damien nodded once before stepping toward the hallway leading deeper into the penthouse. The guest room is ready. Ethan stood slowly from the stool, still emotionally disoriented from everything tonight had become. Just before he reached the hallway, Damien spoke again behind him. Ethan. Ethan turned back immediately. Damien stood near the kitchen beneath the warm lights, one hand resting lightly against the marble counter while Manhattan glowed endlessly behind him. For the first time all night, the billionaire looked almost uncertain. Tomorrow, Damien said quietly, the internet is going to decide we are either a scandal or a love story. Ethan's pulse skipped. Damien held his gaze steadily. I would like the chance to become the second one.